Overview and critique, Line.
Anyone know? They consider impact coming out of the JMUCUNY. This means that we get full weight of the impact on this critique. That neoliberalism is what causes structural violence and war. And our Director Forker talks about how the use of marginalized voices works in the opposite direction of overthrowing class. And our Smith and Forker talks about how identity politics precludes class struggle, and that we cannot overthrow this neoliberal issue with identity politics or the focusing on marginalized voices, because it will heavily fracture the movement, and we need the entirety of the class to work together to overthrow neoliberalism. This is our alternatives to our Frank 12 talks about how we need to have a boring politics, that we need to address the state, and the oppression of black females since we're in the base of class exploitation. Their starting point of rejecting gender and racial oppressions only allows structures of oppression to continue only by transcending capitalism is an oppression-free world possible in Bell and Hammer 98. Black feminism emphasizes the need to identify oppression that explains the substantial variance occurring among women class relations within capitalist political economy, as ultimately accounting for the current forms of life and the conditions of black women classes. Social interaction based on one's material relations to the means of production and control over the distribution of goods and services. Current class structure includes capitalists, the working class wage workers employed by capitalists who must sell their labor in the effort to meet their daily needs. The conditions in the U.S. have been enabled by white men to gain control over production, and patriarchy, racism, and heterosexism have been developed to maintain the system in which men are privileged and women over women, whites over those of color. And within a capitalist political economy that frames individual life changes the system of exploitative social relations to perpetuate structural ideological forces of varying forms of oppression, provide means by which institutions maintain the existing class structure, racial and gender oppression, and in particular we need to sustain capitalism. The shortcoming of focusing solely on racist and gender ideologies strategies focuses on the representation, not class exploitation, until we fully address the class issues of our efforts for liberation will be futile. The women in socialist countries fare better than women in capitalist countries. We conceded this link that when we focus on when we focus on race or on gender, this takes away from the focus on class, which is what we really need to overthrow capitalism. And so that's why their perm doesn't function, because their perm means that they focus on class will inevitably be overshadowed by the focus on gender and race, which means that we will never actually solve for neoliberalism. Also, they say that black feminism addresses these issues. Neoliberalism reappropriates anti-racist discourse to serve profit motives, prevents them and discourse from having any spillover effect. Jerome 13, I'm only reading the bold. Neoliberal warriors argue that democratic values to be subordinated to economic considerations. Socialism is translated as private dilemmas. There is no language here. They're recognizing anti-democratic forms of power, developing non-market values of fighting against substantive injustices in a society founded on deep inequalities, particularly those based on race and class. Under neoliberalism, language is often shown for critical and social reign of neoliberalism. The changing vocabulary about race and racial justice can be understood and engaged. The neoliberalism undermines the public space in where non-commercial values and crucial social issues can be discussed and debated and engaged in public space. Privatized in the hours, disconnected from social obligations, it becomes difficult to isolate individuals living in a consumption-oriented spaces to construct and ethically engage with the power-sensitive language and capable of accommodating the principles of ethics and racial issues. The justice is as a common good rather than the private affair. The elimination of post space and subordination of democratic values and commercial interests narrow the discursive possibilities for supporting notions of public good that create the conditions of suspicion against others and intolerance of differences and resentment of strangers and demands the separatists vanish from them, and individual freedom is not just connected from a sense of civic responsibility or just deregulated social order in which the winner takes all civic. In enacting one's sense of agency as almost exclusively private endeavor, freedom cancels out civic courage and social responsibility. Attention is detracted away from the reality of institutional racism and towards the lack of black self-development, appeals to freedom, and operating under the sway of market forces offer no signposts theoretically or politically for engaging racism. This means that because they have chosen to focus on racism and gender, that it will inevitably be that neoliberalism will reappropriate those discourses to serve its own motives, which means that their impacts will be inevitable. And so we should focus on overthrowing neoliberalism. And our position against neoliberalism is necessary to reinvigorate moments against the state. The alternative recovers the possibility of performative resistance against dominant structures. It's a political crisis of solidarity toward 13. Its identity and consciousness is structured in complex ways that reflect the intersectionality of race, class, gender, and sexuality, in which some social groups have much more power and opportunity than others, and they fail to recognize that the performative options of working class individuals. And so we went because we went our impact, that means that the only way, that means first of all, that the app is a bad idea because it will fracture our movements towards overthrowing neoliberalism. Also, it means that our alternative is the only way to solve, because our alternative is the only way that prevents the criticism from being an end to itself. And our argument is not that 1AC wasn't authentic and radical enough, but rather that the model of debate as resistance politics is palliative. They sell out debate's potential to generate positive agendas for change by making the ballot about affirming their voices. As such, our counter role of the ballot is to refuse those terms as starting points and to reclaim the political. We need to be reclaiming political to make any actual changes to overthrow the neoliberalism. They conceded the link and the impact, which means that they don't get any access to the perm, which means that you vote neg on this critique. Also, they say that they can engage the state, but our argument is that that engaging the state is the only way to solve, and they have given no reason why they can't get any access to the state. Also, they say that narratives are good for debate, but we're talking about narratives fracturing the capitalist movement. They say that traditional knowledge disenfranchise black bodies, but we're not saying that you have to follow traditional knowledge. We're saying that you should take your knowledge and engage the state with it, and not just use it in this round.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question. You said fraction our movement to overthrow. Who is our?
The overall class struggle against neoliberalism.
Right, and that assumes that different identities and genders all share a collective.
Class struggle, yes.
Really?
Yes.
You share the same struggle that I share.
I'm not saying it's the same struggle. I'm saying that we collectively share the class struggle. Capitalism.
How do you get to speak for what we collectively share? If you're saying that I can't even
capitalism affects my body as a woman. Capitalism affects your body differently as a black woman, but that doesn't mean that capitalism doesn't affect both bodies.
Okay. On to the Schwartz 13 card. You said the focus on gender. Can you explain that card?
Which card?
Your Schwartz 13 card.
Yeah, so this part is talking about how neoliberalism, it's necessary to have your movement against the state, and
can you achieve that through the political protest that you can't achieve that?
We're not saying a political protest, we're saying boring politics.
No, I'm saying, you said that earlier, you said that you can't achieve this through protests or narratives, right?
Yeah, no, so for example, we talked about Occupy and how that movement just fell that because it doesn't actually engage the state. It just creates some media hype for 5 seconds.
So if we can prove that individual resistance is political.
No, because that individual resistance also won't overthrow neoliberalism because it fractures the movement.
And the only way you can overthrow neoliberalism
is through the collective class struggle overthrowing neoliberalism.
Okay, on to the okay, and why do you feel like neoliberalism is a starting point, or needs to be the starting point?
Neoliberalism needs to be the starting point because it's the root cause of commodifying bodies, so our argument is that it's neoliberalism that allowed white supremacists people
So before neoliberalism, which is a newer form of capitalism, how do you argue?
Well, our argument talks about capitalism as a whole, too.
Okay, so before capitalism, then how would you say?
Our argument would be that capitalism is what drove people into African countries, like you're saying you're wanting to see.
Okay, even though we're